Hey, Voodoo Power listeners. Before we start the show, let me tell you about Strength Coach Pro. Strength Coach Pro is the ultimate coaching companion for passionate strength coaches. Strength Coach Pro is a powerful platform allowing coaches to sequence programs for an entire year, ensuring athletes stay on track. It features a simple drag and drop design for program building. It's easy and efficient, allowing for customized workouts. Another great feature of Strength Coach Pro is the real-time leaderboard feedback. Athletes love competition, creating a fun, engaged, and motivated environment where they can thrive. Strength Coach Pro is trusted by coaches at all levels, from professional to D1, high school, and professional trainers looking for an easy way to streamline programming needs. Whether working with 10 clients or 1,000 athletes, there are no limits to the support of this program. In addition, there's a 14-day trial for coaches where they can explore the platform for themselves. At just $50 a month or $500 a year, the value is unbeatable. Please don't miss your opportunity. Coaches can reach out to Strength Coach Pro for a demo today. Let them work to save you time and elevate your coaching. Now on to the podcast.
Welcome to the Voodoo Power Podcast. Welcome to Plates and Pancakes. We're sitting down today with Dane Miller. Coach Miller is the owner of Garage Strength Sports Performance and Throws University. Miller has directly coached and oversaw the strength and conditioning for 12 Olympians. He was part of the Samoan Athletics contingent at the Tokyo and the Paris Olympics. From 2016 to 2025, Miller has coached at every world championship for Olympic weightlifting and Olympic track and field. Coach Miller was a strength coach for the South Dakota State wrestling team, and in 3 years produced 7 All-Americans. Coach Miller threw for Penn State University, where he was a 5-time Big Ten place winner, track and field team captain, and 4-time academic All-Big Ten scholar athlete. Miller is a certified international level coach in USA Weightlifting and USA Track and Field. Coach Miller is the recipient of the USA Weightlifting Larry Barnholth Award for coaching excellence. Miller takes pride in developing athletes from their first day in the gym all the way to their moments at the Olympics and world stages. So welcome to the show, Coach.
All right, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I was really excited about this, and I've got your book, I've watched your stuff, and the further I got into it, the more overwhelmed I got. I hope these questions aren't too remedial, but we'll see where they go, because man, your stuff is really good, but it takes some time to figure out.
Yeah. I think I'll say this, that I've realized over the years, I live, Jason, who you met off air, right? He's always saying that we live on an island, and I live on this island, and oftentimes I think that everybody is experiencing what I'm thinking, and they have the same coaches around them, and they have the same athletes, and it's like, I try to convey all these thoughts, and I'm trying to do a better job with this of simplifying my mind and also slowing down my thoughts so that it's not so overwhelming for people that are not as privileged as we are with the athletes and the coaches that we have. So I'm sorry.
No, if guys like you weren't putting this stuff out there, how would we ever get our hands on it and try to figure it out?
I appreciate that. Yeah.
I saw it in some Poliquin stuff, and then it was like in the first couple pages of your book, but rate typing athletes.
Okay.
How important is that for you to get them in there and figure out what kind of athlete you're dealing with?
So I think that I would look at that two different ways. Okay. I'm looking at it, one from a physiological point, like what type of athlete are we dealing with as far as rate coding, in the sense that how athletic are they? How explosive are they? How or not explosive? How well do they coordinate? I would see that as one aspect, and I think that's important to figure out, but I don't think it's as important as trying to figure out the psychological aspect of the athlete. I think that oftentimes we all as coaches will get lost in the testing their how fast twitch are they, how explosive can they be, how well do they coordinate, and are there any issues with mobility and whatnot, and that stuff's important. But I think it's actually more important to break down the psychological aspect of the athlete and figure out who are we dealing with and what are they motivated by, and then that's really what I try to I think is more important actually than anything else.
Now, when you say that, are you getting into I know in the book it gets deep into the three types of athlete. You have a Zen athlete, you got a meathead, and then you've got one that kind of falls in the middle there. Is that
Yeah.
kind of what you're referring to?
Yeah, yeah. And so what we try to do is we'll try to determine if we're looking at someone like the Zen athlete, which I think is pretty easy to think about, the athlete that's like they'll come in and they do exactly what they're supposed to do. They don't challenge you that much. They execute things pretty well. The second athlete would be, we changed the name, it's like the social individual, the person who they might struggle with stress a little bit more. And I think that there's oftentimes this is the type of athlete that might have a little bit more emotional baggage, and they struggle with criticism at times. And then you have that third athlete, the athlete that's like constantly, the aggressor, the super aggressive athlete that, and that would be me. But when I was an athlete, was like, I just wanted to go for broke all the time. And I think that it's important as a coach to identify those types, and then identify what kind of training each one might need, and then also the way that you're going to communicate with them. And then that in turn leads to you having levels of empathy, which with each one, dependent upon the scenario that they're in, which also helps you establish that trust, and helps them establish their purpose in training too. So that's how I like to think about it.
Now, once you establish what they are, it seems like listening to you talk about some things and reading, they're not really going to change who they are. So you have to mold your coaching aspect, I guess, to fit them more than anything. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I think there's some points where you could change slightly. I think most of us are pretty rooted in that makeup, that social makeup. And I think that you can see some individuals as they make progress through their careers over a very long time horizon, you might see that slightly change. I think most coaches aren't dealing with athletes for more than like 8 to 10 years at a time. So it's harder to see that. Um, I also think that when you have an athlete who might go through like really effective therapy or something like that, I think there's a chance, but I think in most cases you're not going to really see it. And I think it's better that the coach is communicating differently with each person dependent upon that makeup.
Okay. Yeah. That's reading that. I just don't know that I've seen enough athletes that I can lump them all in and identify them as quickly as you have, obviously. But your system, you understand what you want, and it works really well.
I would say this is like, if I look at, and a lot of coaches, actually, I just presented at an NSCA conference last weekend, a regional one, and the coach had asked me about this off to the side, and I said, listen, if we're gonna think about this, and how you can apply this would be, it's different if you have a weightlifter or a wrestler, like an individual sport's slightly different. But if you're looking at a group setting, and let's say you've got 20 guys in the gym, right? And you got a football team, it's very likely that your quarterback is going to be a Zen type guy, like type athlete. It's highly likely that they see things a little bit more from a big picture perspective. I honestly, Jalen Hurts, I would say, like, just by reading his quotes and stuff, you're sitting there and you're like, this guy's clearly like that style, that Zen type personality who's calm under pressure. And then I think that you'd see in most cases, I think on the defensive side, you would see someone like a safety who might be making those reads, likely has that as well. I think I like to look at it, and then you can almost put it into the positions. Most linebackers are going to be a type 3. Okay. And I think most football guys will be type 3. I think some of the type 2s that you would see might be on the line. Um, Maybe they were super heavy when they were younger, and they had people would make fun of them and things like that. So they have a little bit of a self-conscious aspect to them. But I think that's how I would look at that application through the group setting. I don't know if that makes sense, if that helps at all for clarity.
Well, it kind of let you know where guys could possibly fall by their role on the team and what positions they choose. Yeah, so definitely.
Okay. I was trying to paint like a sports picture there too, just to make it a little bit easier for comprehension.
And the book gets really deep into that, and it's something that I'll have to come back to as I coach longer and longer to refine what I'm seeing, I think.
I think about all this stuff is like you're looking at it as like it's a practice and it's a muscle, and it's like how can we as coaches take the biggest things and practice it over and over again, and technique and learning technique and having cues and how we communicate those cues to an individual. I think about myself with one kid. With some kids, you'll have them say like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to practice that. I want to focus on this, because what you want them to focus on is really challenging, and that's why they don't want to do it. And typically those are going to be the type 2s. On a type 1, they're willing to listen to 1 or 2 cues and just beat it into the ground, and they don't need to hear anything else. And then that type 3, they might hear you say a cue, but they're just going to try harder with effort and with yelling and with being aggressive, but not actually improve the technical precision. So I think that as a coach, we have to then figure out, okay, the type 3s have to do more technical work in their warm-ups because they're not going to care once we get really heavy. The type 2s, we got to be open and try to sneak in the technical improvement. And all this stuff just becomes a skill of like when we want to pull the levers as effectively as possible. And if we're not constantly trying to practice this, we're just going to feel, and there's going to be days that we feel like we're spinning our wheels in place and not going anywhere, but that's just part of us growing over time. And I think that that's the most important thing that we should expect from ourselves as the leaders, is that we need to constantly just try to think like, look, we're going to practice just like the athletes are, and we got to get better at coaching, just like the athletes need to get better at lifting or training or whatever sport they're doing.
Some of these questions come from some things I've changed. We ended up with some throwers out here. We've got some throwers that are looking at going to good colleges, and they're going to be asked to do some Olympic weightlifting. It's not something we have done a lot. So I've added some variations in. I don't know that I'm ready to coach full snatches and things like that, but
Yeah.
So your book, you explain it a little bit different, and it maybe helped me to understand some things to do. You talk about the no man's land being from below the knee to right above the knee. And then your knees come back as you come up above your knees, and then your knees go forward to catch the bar, and then your hips come. If I'm correct on how I was reading, how I understood that. Now, just reading that, I had a very difficult time envisioning what you're saying, because you don't want the butt to drop. You just want the knees to go forward. You had just posted a video of your son cleaning some incredible weight, and I don't know what it was about him, but it seemed like I was finally able to see it. So then now I can coach that a little bit better in my athletes. Maybe I'm just missing it. I haven't heard a whole lot of guys talk to me about getting the knees forward. When did you stumble on that, and what made you see it?
Okay. So I what I think it is with Lincoln is that I think that his legs are so long and he's so slow to the reciprocation point, which is what we were referring to right above the knee. He's so slow, pull. And then once he gets there, it's like, boom, and he goes. So it makes it like, and then when you rewatch it, you're like, God damn, he's slow until he gets to that point. And then he lights it up and he finishes. And I think that was something that I think there's a couple factors. One, when I trained with Dr. Anatoly Bondarchuk, so he was like my throws coach and had a big, he was the head of Soviet throwing, and he had a connection to the like godfather of the weightlifting realm for the Soviet system. And so he had recommended, go check this guy's book out. And I had not had a background in weightlifting. I was coached by a guy who we snatched in high school, we cleaned in high school, but I wasn't a weightlifter. We just did this for lifting. Like we would snatch, clean, squat, front squat, bench, lots of benching. And that was my experience. I was never like formally taught. So I learned this technique in high school. Now, I didn't learn the knee aspect. We learned at an early age just to stay flat-footed as long as possible, which sounds counterintuitive because a lot of people are taught to play on their toes or whatever, anything like that. So that was how we were taught that simple cue. Now, fast forward, this is 2008 to like 2016, let's say. That's like my development into the sport of weightlifting. And I was fortunate enough that I was around a guy named Zygmunt Smalzerts, who's a Olympic champion from Poland. I was around the Poliquin group for quite a while. And then I was around, I think, at the time, Norik Vardanian, who is Yuri Vardanian's son. He had a very big impact on me with staying flat-footed and like having that chest rise, but staying as flat-footed as possible to keep the bar towards the center of mass as much as possible. Now, going back to your original question about how I stumbled upon the knee issue, is that I kept noticing there was constantly a gap around the below the knee into that low thigh point. And I kept reflecting back to this book that I actually have in front of me, because I actually just filmed a video talking about this. And one of the things that Vorobiev talked about was there's like basically 7 key concepts, but the ankle joint plays a massive role. So like the bar staying tight to the ankle and to the shin. And Piros Dimas, who's a 3-time Olympic champion, someone that I learned a lot from. I've spent a lot of time with him talking about technique, and he would always say about getting the knees back, clearing the knees back, get the knees back. And I would say, what about when the bar is going around the kneecap? And there was never really any discussion, but Vorobiev would talk about, you have a weak full extension. The cause is that, I'm reading this actually right here, is that the cause is insufficiently strong muscles participating in full extension. The lifter does not place the knees under the bar moves far away from the center mass, and then there's no agreement on the finishing of the lift. And that's just a one little excerpt. So he mentions pushing the knees under the bar 4 times in the book. And my biggest thought there was when the knees come back. So if like the knees would go back here, okay, if my knees come back and then I load to here, it's very similar to like doing a counter movement. Now my quads and my hamstrings are loaded, so I have like a co-contraction around my knee, and now I'm in a really good spot. And then I come through with my hips, and then I finish. And if you watch Soviet trained athletes, they did this really well. And if you watch Kuo, who lifts for Taiwan, she's probably the best technician ever, I would argue. She's coached by a Soviet coached athlete who very likely was taught from the system that Vorobiev created, who worked with Dave Riegert, who then became the Soviet or the Russian coach once the Soviet Union collapsed. Now, I'm not saying that the Soviets have all the answers, but I'm saying that I think they were very clear on their processes, and I think that that's something that we've sort of struggled with in the U.S. is clarity around all these things. And so it really comes back to Dr. B recommending this after I was working with him, and him being like, yo, check out Vorobiev, and then breaking that down and learning this is the technique I was teaching people. And then, Max Aida was making fun of me, like, yeah, you're just making up this reciprocation point. I'm like, I'm not making this up. I'm getting this from Vorobiev, who's literally godfather of the Soviet system. So that's really where it comes down to, is like, and if you have somebody with the big back squat, and a lot of throwers have huge back squats, and you can teach them how to get the knees under the bar, which helps load the quads again. And now you're into that counter movement position. Now they're going to use their back squat more effectively because their chest is more upright while they have more knee flexion, and then the hips start to extend. And I actually think that the hips extend and then the knees extend, whereas a lot of people think that the hips extend last. I actually think that the hips extend first and then the knees finish it. So sorry, I was thinking that's a long-winded answer on that one.
It's a great answer, though. And that's what's so great about being able to ask you the questions from your book, is you're going to answer them how you intended when you wrote it.
Yeah.
So adding on to that then, bar drift. I didn't notice how bad the bar was drifting on me in my deadlift until I got a little bit of help. But as you start watching people, you start seeing the pulls and how far that bar drifts away. So getting athletes to learn to wedge in there and keep that bar running right up their shins,
Yeah, so that's a hard one, especially because what you'll tend to see is that, it- and if we're thinking about right off the floor for somebody who's snatching or cleaning or okay, so something like that, and that's where I would say there's two things here. If I have an athlete that's a non-weightlifting athlete, we do a lot of box work. So we go off of like a one box almost, I'd say 85% of the time. So it decreases by about 7 inches the range of motion for the athlete. And this would be football players, wrestlers, swimmers, um, throwers quite a bit. We go off of one box and two boxes, and we'll do hangs. Now, the way that I would recommend if I had a weightlifter to fix it, and what we do with our throwers and football players is that we would do like a low hang and we would pause from a low hang. Because then what ends up happening is that it's much more pronounced when you have an eccentric movement. So if you do like a low hang and you have straps like and you're doing a snatch or a clean and you lower to like mid shin right before the bar is about to touch and then you pause one, two, and then you go and you cue them on the knees back, that typically helps them feel like having a more upper back here, and you want to teach them how to do the pull in reverse. So actually, a lot of what they've found, um, the Soviet system has a very clear system on how they teach the movements, and they teach the movements in reverse order. And that's sort of what we implement, a reverse order teaching, and then we try to use the teaching of the movement in warm-ups. So even after you get proficient, we're still using them as warm-ups so that you start to feel those positions. So it's like feeling the reverse of the pull before you do the pull helps. And then also I would say not to be so tight. If you're just lifting, let's say you're doing a clean right off the floor or snatch right off the floor, not to be so tight that you tend to like dump your chest forward. You want your chest to come up and your knees to come back. And if you can do that with the barbell and don't be so tight through your shoulders, because that's one thing I think in the deadlift is you'll be a little bit tighter in your upper back and your lats. Whereas and you will have that to a point, but you want a little bit more arch back on a snatch. And I think if you can just think and you drill with the bar and you go bar to the knee, coming back, chest up, knees go back, chest goes up, knees go back, chest goes up, knees go back, push through the midfoot, knees go back, chest up, push through the midfoot. And it's like those three cues over, 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 over. And I think that one thing as coaches that we shy away from is that we try to look for 900 cues, but really kids need to hear the same cues 900 times. And then all of a sudden they get it. And they're like, oh shit, I got it. Oh my God, now I see the knees back. Oh, now I feel the chest coming up. Oh my God, I'm pushing through the midfoot. And it's important that we look at cues as similar to reps of the lift. And there's different, kids learn at different paces. Some kids might take 1,000 reps, some kids might take 50 of hearing that. And I think that once we recognize that, that helps. And I actually think that what you see from what we see is that kids also really like to solve these problems. Kids, you give a kid a Rubik's Cube and you lock them into a room and you say, hey, you got to solve this Rubik's Cube, and you don't get to play on your phone or on your iPad or Switch or anything. Dude, kids love playing with Rubik's Cubes. They love solving puzzles. They love getting challenges. And the lifts are a challenge for them to buy into your culture, for them to buy into what you're trying to help them do. And that's become a champion. And so now all of a sudden they have to solve this technique, and they're like, man, snatches are hard, cleans are hard. And you might have some kids that just don't want to do them because of that. But then all of a sudden, when we break that wall down, now they learn that pushing the knees back, getting the chest up, pushing through the midfoot helps them keep the bar tighter. They've just solved the puzzle, and now they can get stronger. And it's like a light bulb goes off, and all of a sudden they start to see other things in lifting and in throwing or whatever sport they're playing, football, wrestling. They see it through technique more than they see it through emotion. And that's the big goal that we want, is that we want them to see things through technique, because when they get good on in the circle or in the football field or wrestling mat, whatever it is, that's when you beat everybody. That's the whole goal.
Well, I had a question on that because it come up in the book, and you talk very much about overcoaching and how easy it is to do. And it seems like sometimes you think you'll find the right words to get the athlete to do what you want it to do, but maybe it's not that easy. It's more about giving them fewer words, letting them solve the puzzle. and then putting it together at the end. Am I
Yeah.
kind of onto that? Is that kind of
You're 100%. Yeah, that's exactly it. I think that's like, and that's where, in the book, I try to talk about variations. So using different exercises to teach technique. Yeah, I think it's really important to minimize the coaching in person. And it's more so about like principles. I think establishing the principles at each point of a lift or each point of a movement, each point of a throw, each point of a jump, and you're establishing, you're sort of chunking that for the athlete, and you're making it easier for them to then interpret. I think it should be a goal to have as little interaction as possible. So that also means that on the front end, you got to do a lot of work and like hands-on stuff, and you also have to establish expectations. Like you have to establish like, this is the process. You're going to come into the gym and you're going to do this process, and if you waver from it, you're going to get yelled at by me. Like that's what's going to happen. And I think that's like one thing of, maybe, I don't know if that would be pragmatism. It's like taking these, it's holding the athlete as accountable as possible, but then at the same time giving them the longest leash that you can give them. And it's like, it's a very fine line that everybody's got to be on. But when everybody's on it, that's when everybody has more fun and they can get more done, and they can, they feel more fulfilled from training. And that, if they're not feeling fulfilled, they're not going to show up. So that's like the big thing. It's like, yo, guess what? If we can get the kids to feel as though their work is paying off, they're going to come. They're going to keep coming. That's the whole thing here. And they're going to have more, enjoyment in what they're doing. And they're going to become champions in whatever that definition is. That could mean that they're an Olympic champion. That could mean that they just started varsity. Whatever that word means to that individual, based off of what they have, what their genes are and what their work ethic is, we're going to get that done. And that's ultimately the goal that we have to be working towards, I think.
Well, taking that a little further, we've got into technique quite a bit. And as my technique has gotten better, I think I've stumbled across it with athletes. And then you mentioned it in your book, so it makes me think I'm on the right track. Most athletes don't miss weights if they're attainable because they're not strong enough. They miss it because there's a flaw in their technique. They're out of the groove somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Getting weights heavy enough for athletes so that you can see when they're out of the groove, is that a way to kind of tackle that? You got to be able to see when the groove's missed. If the weights are too light, then they can kind of cheat it. Do you have to find that good range?
So in my mind, what I like to think about is there's going to be typically, it's going to be, you're going to miss I think you're describing it really well. Because honestly, let me sidetrack, because I think that you said the way you described it should ring true for everybody. You said, find the groove. And I think if you're in the powerlifting realm, that if that deadlift is just out of the groove, you could have a deadlift be out of the groove and it feels 100 pounds heavier. You could have the deadlift in the groove and in the slot, and you're going, that I could add 100 pounds. And it's just like a bench press. Anybody bench presses, and if they hit right here and they're hammering it in the groove, they slaughter it. If you hit down here, you're not hitting it. If you hit up here, you're not hitting it. And it's the same weight. And that's the groove. And so if we clarify that, there's the groove, right? Now we're establishing that there's a movement pattern that makes it best to achieve a certain load. And then the next thing would be, you're going to have that exposure based off of either too much load on the bar or too much fatigue based off of volume of reps. So if we're doing like triples, we might see somebody in a snatch, let's say, miss a snatch because the volume on that third rep, they're slightly fatigued. And so now they're missing the groove because you have to be that much more coordinated and that much more precise with the snatch. Whereas with and then if we go with a single, we might see that okay, now the load is so heavy that now they have to be even more dialed in, and they missed it because the load was too heavy, or they missed it because they were out of the groove because the load now exposed them to that error in their technique. And so then we would set up training based off of that type of volume or that type of intensity, and then analyze on a regular basis where the error was, and then try to target that weakness from that the weakness that caused the error with either technique or strength stuff or positional work. So I like to look at it. Yes, I think oftentimes we shy away, and I think that this is like a partial, there's like a functional thing going on where you should be more functional with your training. And I also think that there's a lot of coaches that'll be like, well, you shouldn't lift that heavy because you want to focus more on speed. And maybe there's a point, in certain events, in certain sports, there's a point, but I think they've taken that too far. Yeah, there's a gray area with everything, but I think it's being as clear with each specific scenario. I think we should be lifting a lot heavier than most people would think. Which is also why you come into the gym and you go and like, holy shit, there's a kid, we have a 12-year-old girl that can clean 200 pounds. It's like, yeah, and she's not the first. Like that. This is consistently normal. Maybe not normal, but
The guys at the gym, they were catching up, and they were asking who was on the podcast next. I told them you. So they went and found your Instagram, and then they come back to me and they're like, holy crap, do you see what this guy's kids are lifting? And I'm like, he's got it figured out, I'm telling you. So yeah, they've just been following your page and your YouTube and all that once they figured out what your athletes were doing, and it's insane.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I think it's like it still goes back to the same thing with even with the cues. It's like, as a coach, I'm never, maybe, and this is a downfall of me, is I'm always trying as hard as I can to like push people as much as possible and to figure out better ways to push people, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. And that would bring up another set of questions. I had a friend send a video, I want to say it was Sunday morning, and you were very much in depth on trigger lifts and how to improve your main lift through your trigger lifts. And
Yeah.
that was very interesting to watch because you had benchmarks for everything. I guess, how long did it take you to figure out what triggered the lifts the best? Like bench press, you had incline press, you had heavy dips, you had things like that. You had one for the snatch, and then you had one for the clean, I believe. So how much data did you have to go through before you started establishing that, hey, these are the benchmarks, these are the triggers?
I think it's like, I think about it as an association. So here's the thing too, is like we test on site typically we're going to see 14 weeks is about the time frame. And we've got over 200 active members, and we've been doing this now consistently, I'd say for like, let's say probably since right before COVID, consistent. Now before that, we were still testing and going through things regularly. We didn't have the resources on site. It was mainly myself and one other trainer. So we were testing a lot, but not as dialed in with the data feedback, but we still understood what was going on. And now what's even better with Peak Strength, with our strength training app, is that now we can see on the other end of all the users that are inside of our tool, or inside of Peak Strength, that we can actually see their impact on those lifts. And then you factor that in with being coached by, one of the things Dr. B would talk about was transfer of training. So as soon as I started the gym in 2008, I started to look at, okay, if I have a wrestler and he's doing, let's use the incline bench, right? And we're looking at the incline bench. If we had 100 wrestlers or 100 kids, and now this is another factor, is that now I'm the strength coach for South Dakota State. Even though I'm in southeastern Pennsylvania, I have 35 Division I Big 12 wrestlers that I have direct access to. They have the program in place. We deploy the program. They have to keep track of everything. Then the strength coach that's on site has to track everything, and then he gives us spreadsheets back that have all the results based off of their main lifts, the main fundamental lifts. And so that it sort of works back to 15 plus years of doing it, but then also saying like, okay, these are the fundamental lifts that every single sport has based off of their sport characteristics. So we establish what those fundamental lifts are. It's going to be 6 for each area of sports. And then we're looking at it going like, okay, if we have somebody who's got a bench, and let's say, using the bench example, well, what happens if their shoulders are really strong? Well, if their shoulders are really strong, we got to see how maybe they're losing some give in their tricep strength. So then we can see on the dips, and if we see the dip go up, well, did that then increase their bench? Well, yeah, increase their bench, but then their incline stayed the same. And so we would see these patterns happening, and then over time, that created, okay, if we're looking at bench, right, you're going dumbbell bench, incline bench, dips. Those are really the 3 big triggers, okay, that we're seeing as direct carryovers. And like close grip bench, there's a lot there, but mainly those are the 3 main ones. You're looking at a clean, and you're going, okay, well, it's hard to measure like a clean pull, a failure of a clean pull, because there's a technical error. But if we're looking at back squat, front squat, we can see like really clearly based off of this that there's going to be a range that they're in. So I would say over 15 plus years of bringing that in, but also getting sort of tipped by Dr. B that that's for real and it happens, and that we've got to resolve that and figure that out. And some people with longer legs might have, they might be really good at pulling, but their limiting factor is the squatting portion of the clean. And that's actually going back to Vorobyev's book, is like, he even talks about that. We're like, okay, so you have to figure out the body type, you have to figure out the temperament. Some lifters will clean something and they can pull very well, they can catch well, but they can't stand it up. Other lifters can squat really well, but they can't pull as well. So then we have to increase that, and we'll see that's initially that transfer of training. So it's almost as though the trigger exercises that we're describing are going to be very transferable, but it also goes back to the fundamental lifts. And then the final way I tie it through is that we're dealing with a lot of high school kids. High school kids love having milestones, right? So we think about culture, and we think about what kids can do to be better. Kids, we all like this. We all like having our backs rubbed. We all like hitting things that make us feel good deep down inside, nice, warm, and fuzzy. So if you can tell a kid, you got to bench 135, that's your first milestone. Then you got to bench 185, using the bench as an example. Then you got to bench 225, 250, 275, 300, 315. These are milestones that when you hit them as a kid, you get pulled through, and it's a game. I just got to the next level. So what we did is we set these milestones up to get kids motivated. And then we can say, hey, you're at 250 to get to 275. And right now we got a 4-week program, and it's an incline bench to, let's say you got to hit 205 now for a set of 5 to 8 reps on incline bench to get that 275 bench. So then in their head, if we're not focusing on the flat bench, but we're doing the incline, they start to play that game themselves and realize that the incline will help their flat bench, and that helps them pull through and stay motivated long term because of that long-term buy-in to the full system. And it's like, I think there's a lot of things at play. It's setting up going back to what are the key fundamental lifts for the sport, because that's the most important part. And then how do we push those as well as we possibly can? But then on top of that, it's the game of keeping athletes motivated and passionate and recognizing the purpose of every single session. So there's the psychological aspect of it as well. And then it's analyzing the data too. So when, South Dakota State sends me the stuff, I got to look at it. Okay, this is where we're seeing trends. And it's the same thing with the trends on site here at the gym at Garage Strength. So I think about it. Yeah, it's hard to, it's like a 5-layered process, I guess.
Well, if we took that from a 180 view, and I don't know if you've ever seen it, let's use the bench press, being we're down this road. I think you said 225 on the incline for 5 would kind of come out to a 315 flat bench. Do you ever see a kid or an athlete that's a 315 flat bench, but their incline's crap, and that you need to improve that? And if you do, does it show some weakness? Does it show where a potential injury could happen because the numbers aren't fitting into your program?
Yeah. And I think that's when you'll see even kids in a sport, they'll be more prone to, like, in that case, what you just provided, you might see that athlete's more prone to shoulder issues in their sport because they have a weaker incline. Yeah, and I would even argue, you have a kid, let's say a normal kid's 220, 200 pounds, and they bench 315. They should be able to do 10 pull-ups. So you should also see if that's a weakness as well. Not that the pull-ups will carry over tremendously well. They'll show a little bit. But you can also use that as a guide, because I think you're definitely right where you'll see with that weakness. And then you also will see there's some people that then you push the shoulders, like the incline, and all of a sudden their bench just goes boom and it just takes off. It's like, wow, we should have targeted their shoulder strength earlier. And I would even recommend, when you see someone's incline is really bad, target their dumbbell incline first. Target that first, and then get into the higher intensity lift of with the barbell, but target the dumbbell aspect first. Usually is more beneficial.
Now, these are a few questions I had before we run out of time. They're just things I had wondered about or thought about. When I was riding horses a lot, I rode with Peter Campbell. He's passed on, but he used to always talk about if the ride was good and you turn that horse out, you could come back in 2 years and he'd be better. If the ride was crap and you come back in 2 years, he'd be worse. In your book, you hit on that. The body remembers the last thing it did. So understanding how to wrap up your training so that the next training can benefit from that. What are you looking at? Are you looking at explosive movements? How are you setting up the training before the next day?
So I think that's a really good question, because I think that it depends on the level of the athlete. I think that when you have, when like our athletes that have gone to the Olympics or World Championships, let's say throwers specifically, we're going to do some type of rotational movement, like a side medicine ball throw or a standing throw or something like that. But then we'll also do something similar to what we have our younger kids do. And that's where we finish with mobility work, mainly because we want to see that they can have strength imprinted through longer ranges of motion. And so we will do quite a bit of mobility work at the end of a session. And even at the end of an explosive session, we will still do mobility work there. And I think there's actually, I think it's important to even push visualization while they're doing their mobility. So even talking to the athletes and asking them how the session went, what'd you think about blah, 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 that helps a lot. Not to downplay the significance of it, but I think ultimately the body's going to remember basically one of 2 to 3 things, and it's either going to be the range of motion that you're working through, which is where the mobility comes in, and that's going to help establish the recovery process. And then because your nervous system is heightened from the training, and then you're doing lengthened mobility work, I think the body then remembers those positions more, and it can possibly prevent injury long term. But then I also think there's carryover of doing like rotational stuff if you're a thrower, maybe technical stuff if you're a weightlifter. Sometimes our weightlifters will have things at the end of a session where they're doing just barbell snatches, and they 2 to 3 sets of just barbell snatches at the end of a session, just to feel the shoulders, just to feel the positions. And they might even get back down to the squat, do some snatch presses, and they do a couple knee movement drills, and then they're done. And I think that those can be used as mobility exercises for someone like a shot putter. You get a shot putter or a football player to do some snatches like that with just a barbell. It's mobility work. But then at the same time, when the weightlifter does it, they're hitting those patterns and they're remembering those patterns. The body's going to remember those patterns for the next time they get into their session.
All right. So we touched on it early, especially with the knee thing. You were taking a little bit of flack for how you were coaching it or how you were seeing it and making stuff up. But in the book, you also mentioned this, that Bondarchuk had kind of told you to question everything. And you may see something somebody else may see, and it doesn't matter what level the coach is. You may figure out something that they never stumbled on. So always experimenting and looking for new ways. How has that kept you moving forward?
I think for me, it's the best thing that Dr. B taught me. So when I trained with Dr. B, he would have been, probably 70. I think he's 84 now. So he probably was even older or younger than that. But I think the biggest thing that I learned was I was talking to him and I would go to his house a lot and interview him and ask him questions and just pester him. Like I have an article that you can find. It's like uh, Reflections of a Master, and it's me interviewing Dr. B in 2007, 2008. And that stemmed from like months of me just pestering him. And what I learned was he would say to me, and a lot of training systems work. They work, but don't forget to learn from your athletes, because ultimately that's what makes you a coach, is that you're learning from the athlete. And if you learn from your athlete, you're never going to stop learning. And I think that that's like, today we had a throwing session inside. Last night we had one of the best lifting sessions with weightlifters and the football guys that I've probably ever been a part of. Just an absolutely insane session, and you reflect on it and you're like, okay, what could we do better? What could have went better? And you're thinking through, like the session this afternoon or this morning with the throwers. I was thinking through questions, and they had posed thoughts to me that I hadn't thought about with technique recently. And I think that if we're, to go back to Dr. B, here I was 24 years old, 23 years old, and he had already been Olympic champion, a bronze medalist. And he was so open to me picking his brain and also challenging him on thoughts. And I think that that's where, for myself, I talked about Piros Dimas. This is a guy who's a 3-time Olympic champion in weightlifting, and I've spent months on end with him, and he's willing to hear what I'm doing with athletes. And I think that what it comes down to for me um, is it's just the athletes is who we have to learn from. And if you have that established, and what's your purpose, right? Like my purpose is, I like the journey of coaching, and I like the journey of being better, and I like the journey of getting to the highest level of achievement, because of all the points along the way that are really hard in a struggle. And then when you reflect back, you feel good about it. And it's like, that's it. That's all I want to do. That's what's fun for me. And so if I find that that's my passion, then I need to bring it every single day, because the more I bring it every single day and the more consistent I am, the more these athletes will trust me. And the more they trust me, the more we have this reciprocal relationship where they also value them going along the journey and achieving those things for themselves. Right. So it's like, I want to help them achieve these things as a coach, because it's real. It's the other pull my ego out of it. The other thing is, it's really freaking cool when athletes achieve cool things. It's freaking awesome. It's way cooler when they achieve it than when I achieve it. So if we know that, then every single session, you've got to bring that consistency, and you've got to bring the energy, and you've got to bring the purpose, and you've got to bring that passion to help pull it out of them, because really that's what it's for. And I think if we're constantly looking at learning from the athletes, it's just like this circle of trust between the coach, the athlete, the coach, the athlete, and they trust me, I trust them, and we grow together constantly. And you get to a point that now, I'm learning things from, my son, a 13-year-old, or his one training partner, Loveland, who's 12. I'm learning stuff from them, and I'm still learning stuff from our 30 to 35-year-old post-collegiate Olympic medalist group as well. And I think that that's the important part behind everybody is, as a coach, is like, we've got to constantly be learning, and we got to constantly be pushing to be better versions, I guess. Otherwise you lose your purpose and you lose your passion, and then you should stop coaching.
It turns into a grind instead of something you look forward to.
Yeah, I think that's what. Yeah, that's the easiest. Yeah, you see, you're a lot better with your words than I am, because it's so clearly it is that. It's like, if I feel that way, I usually will take a step back and be like, why am I so stressed? and I try to find in my day what's pissing me off. And I realize it's not coaching that's making me mad. It's usually something else. It's usually something else, like in the business, in the company, that's having me feel stressed. And honestly, I think that's the hardest part of coaching uh, is that we got to try to make money and we got to pay our bills. And that's the part that pisses me off, is it's more like, if we didn't have this dollar that we need to get, like, it'd be way more fun to just coach. And um, I think that's like the ultimate thing for that we have tried to do, is like, I need to figure out how we can make this financially viable and sustainable, to have as minimal of a negative impact on my family, so that we can just constantly focus on being a better coach, because that's ultimately what I find to be the most purposeful experience with, for myself and for the athlete, I think.
Well, Coach, I know you're on limited time. You got athletes getting ready to come in. I can't thank you enough for sitting down this hour and talking about all the things that you got going on, and helping me figure some things out.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I hope I helped a little bit, and I hope we help some people watching. Um, this was fun. The questions were great, and when you were asking me them, we've talked about writing or updating that book, and now I'm like, man, that makes me it inspired me to want to do that. So I want to let you know that this was fun for me too. So I appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much. The book's Comprehending Parabolic Periodization, Sports Planning, and Technical Literacy, and it's on garagestrength.com if anybody's looking for it. I think it's going to be one of those books I refer back to a lot as I mature in coaching, because there is so much information in there. But no, man, this was great. I really appreciate your time.
I want to tell you too, we're actually in the process of, I signed with a publisher. The the company that published Kelly Starrett's book, Supple Leopard, I signed a contract with them. So I'm in the process of writing one on like sports performance around this. So I hope, so you got to hit me up, and in like 3 to 4 months, we should be close to having like our first draft, that I got to send you a draft and see what you think.
Oh, man, I would love that. Yes.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah, and you get it wrote and you need somewhere to talk about it, you hit me up and we'll make sure.
There we go. Again. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. Sounds good.
I'll take all the questions from the book and we'll just roll with it, man.
That's great. That sounds good. All right. Thanks, Steven.
All right, Coach. Have a great day.
Yep, you too. I'll see you.